What is your take on the economic consequences of what has transpired over the last year with regard to the special military operation? Because it feels like they've been vast.
Well, let's start here. Those numbers that you gave us, I think people are starting to realize something. Figures lie and liars figure. People are starting to realize that when we're told that we have 7.5% on inflation, inflation and eggs have gone up by 500%, and they start looking around and they can't find anything they buy that's only
$12
gone
for
up.
12 with eggs. Yeah.
Exactly. They cannot find anything that they buy that's only gone up 7.5%. They start suspecting that we've been had when they hear these jobs numbers and Biden comes out and says, "Oh man, this is the greatest economy ever." People are starting to wake up to the reality that these numbers don't mean anything. Even GDP, we were like, "Oh, Russia has the GDP of, Sheboygan or something." And now it's like, well, for a country with the GDP of Sheboygan, they're doing pretty darn good. And the discussion is now different. It's People are realizing that the financialized economy and its numbers don't really matter in the real world. That the world is economy is not about what you buy and the numbers that you consume, but it is about what you can produce, what you can make, what you can grow, what your industries can produce. And since neoliberalism did away with production and growing and building and things of that nature, now the countries that actually do that stuff are in the driver's seat. If you look at GDP, it's something that Wall Street and the city, it's a number that Wall Street and the city of London came up with. And so in 2008, when the banks, if you're a bank and you repossess 1 million houses, and then you go to your insurance company and you get all the money from the loans because you took out insurance against those loans at a credit default swap. So they were all bad loans. So you get insurance on the loans, that's money. Then you sell the houses again, you get money for that. All of that goes into the GDP. So a million people lost their houses and lost their jobs, but because of the way the GDP is calculated, because the bank made a fortune, they say we have a recovery. But I think people are starting to intuitively realize those numbers don't affect me. The only thing that matters to me is what I can afford to buy. Again, in the real world, can I afford eggs and bread and milk and things of that nature? In the real world, Russia creates gas and titanium and gold. That now we're getting back to the reality of practicality, of solid things that we can touch and feel, instead of narratives about money and narratives about economic and military power. The real thing. I think that's what the world is starting to be forced back to, to a different reality, away from the narrative reality, to a hands-on, a hands-on kind of world, a practical world.
Yeah, the US, of course, in the EU, the collective West has lived off of narratives. I mean, it's lived off of fantasies and myths, talking about its domination, its inherent superiority, its never-ending power, the end of history. The United States is going to sit on top of the global pyramid forever and ever and ever, and there will never be any challenger. But it seems like with this with the conflict in Ukraine, what has transpired, and I want your take on this, Garland. One of the things that's been so striking over the last year has been the de-dollarization acceleration, this acceleration of this trend, where you had so many global South countries, from Argentina to Iran, now Saudi Arabia, expressing interest in joining BRICS, and some of them submitting their applications. We got to throw in Algeria, Turkey, among others, that are also interested in the BRICS group, which is, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries are creating alternative investment infrastructure, and also, by extension and by necessity, an alternative currency structure. Then you have even just developments over the last several weeks. Argentina and Brazil, now with the election of Lula da Silva and Alberto Fernandez, who doesn't have that much longer. Hopefully, there will still be multipolar and left forces that can pull it out in Argentina. But they're even talking about a joint currency union, possibly independent currency for Latin America. Russia and Iran are linking their banks. And of course, the collective West goes mad when they hear this. Saudi Arabia wants to trade oil and RMB. All of this has happened within the last year, since the Ukraine conflict, since Russia's special military operation. And it's, I don't think, any coincidence. I'd like to know your thoughts about the de-dollarization campaign, because I think it hits at this point that you're making about commodities, about what nations produce, how a nation with sovereignty produces certain commodities and then attempts to grow its economy with self-determination and with the idea that its interests need to come first and foremost before it can think about, well, what is it going to do for the world? It seems like this is driving this movement is driving the U.S., the collective West, and of course their neocon handlers absolutely mad.
Again, here's what I think you have to start with that conversation, and that is, we've all seen these advertisements in the U.S. Navy, a force for good, right? So what's going on here? The U.S. Navy, the U.S. empire argues to its internal people, to its citizens. We are a force for the good, and we're going around the world to bring democracy and help people and blah, 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 right? The world knows the truth, particularly the global South, but China and Russia, they know the truth that the U.S. empire and the neocons are a malicious, malignant, coercive force, and that they use their economic power for coercion and evil. And so as a result of that one thing right there, if that's true, and it is, that means that in order to protect themselves, in order to have an opportunity to have independence and sovereignty and to build, that they have to find alternative economic structures, that they don't have a choice. That if in fact it's the US is a force for good, they don't have to do that. If it's a coercive, malicious force, they have no alternative. We see what they're doing. So they're looking around saying, okay, as the U.S. gets more and more desperate, it gets more coercive. It's going after Turkey now. Well, Turkey, when it first started, and they started with all these sanctions, they started threatening India, threatening Turkey, threatening allies. What are we going to do? We're going to have to beat our allies up. We'll beat everyone else. The desperation from the U.S. empire, as they saw their power evaporating, was to be more coercive, which, kind of ironically, paradoxically, had the effect of convincing everyone, holy crap, we got to get out from under these people. They are crazy. They finally lost it. Let's build other structures. And now, as you said, there's all kinds of alternatives starting to build. And the Venezuelas and the Cubas, all of Africa, of the countries that have been stomped into the ground, are now saying, we're going through hard times right now, but we see an option now. Holy moly, if we can get to a point where we can independently buy and sell our goods on the market, and we don't have to deal with the U.S. coercion, we may be able to grow and to prosper and to see what horizons we can what we can achieve, how far we can go. So there's an ugly side to this, but when you look at the countries that have been living in poverty and misery for years as a result of U.S. coercion, they're probably like, yeah, things are kind of tough now, but the idea that we may have a chance to get out of this, we're all for that.
Yeah, I mean, the blowback too from these sanctions, the United States has made Russia the most sanctioned country in the world, but Russia is certainly not alone. So Russia is joined by Iran and 20 plus nearly 30 other countries that are facing devastating sanctions, either directly handed down by the United States or the EU, or through some conduit of the two. And the blowback is pretty astounding now, even just in the last few days. You brought up Libya earlier, right? Libya was one such country that was bullied by the U.S., by NATO, destroyed in 2011. Why was it destroyed? Well, one of the big reasons, not often talked about, was that Muammar Gaddafi had plans on an independent currency for the African continent called the dinar, which would be backed by gold reserves. So there would be a commodity backing this currency, and it's one that Africa has a whole lot of, by the way. There's no shortage of that on the African continent, that a particular raw material. But you know, this de-dollarization campaign has accelerated to the point now, and you said it right, this desperation, because it's not just the Libyas or the Brazils now under Lula, or Russia, right? Because Russia is also pretty, Pepe Escobar talks about it a lot, putting the foot on the gas to try to figure out an independent currency system, because it's kind of existential at this point, given the sanctions. But it's not just them now. You have Turkey, which is a NATO country, but let's face it, it's always been kind of caught in the middle, trying to leverage and hedge its own bets based upon its relationships with both Russia, China, and of course, the United States and NATO countries. And then Saudi Arabia, right? So you have these countries that the United States relies on. I think this is what's striking about this moment. It relies on these countries for its own hegemony. Without Saudi Arabia, without Turkey doing some of the bidding at the very least of the United States, the US's influence around the world would shrivel up very, very fast. And so the fact that the United States feels compelled to try to bully these countries openly in the open air, publicly in the media, diplomatically, send veiled threats, all of this, the fact that it feels like it has to, I think sends a pretty powerful message about especially the economic turmoil that the collective West, led by the US, is facing given this Ukraine conflict.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of things we're looking at now, and that is one of the separation lines between the US and its adversaries is strong central government. The US does not want any country to have a strong central government. A strong central government means a certain level of sovereignty and independence will be expected. And the US does not want you to have sovereignty and independence. If they say sacrifice your country for us, they expect compradors. They expect people that are going to be there to do their bidding. Turkey, look at Hungary. When you look at countries, regardless of the ideology, if they have a strong central government, the United States is at some level right now of war with them, be it politically, diplomatically, economically. They are telling basically the message is you're not allowed to have a strong central government. And if you do and try to make your own decisions, we're coming after you. The problem is it's like whack-a-mole. There's too many of them now. And now they've forced countries into a situation where they have to make a decision. Turkey right now is furious. Turkey is now, I'm reading articles where Turkey is about to have an election, and they have tremendous concern that the U.S. is acting in a manner to try to influence their election, to try to overthrow, whichever government they want in. They're going to try to interfere and make it happen. And the Turks are furious. And these kind of things are going to have repercussions. And the message that they send is, you got to get out from under us. And there's two issues that we use, military and economic. And right now we are spread so thin that it's not an option for us to militarily go after Turkey. There's for any number of reasons to go after Turkey, go after Hungary or whatever. So now the only option the US has is to attack everyone they can economically. And that has the effect of reminding everyone, you got to get out from under these people. So de-dollarization is not something that's happening because people even want to do it. You've got a lot of countries that have a lot of dollars and they're like, it's going to hurt us to get rid of these dollars. Yeah. We don't really want to, but out of desperation, they can say two things. They're saying, I don't want to hold on to these dollars because I think very soon they're not going to be worth what they are now. And which is a self-fulfilling prophecy, I might add. And if I got these dollars, it's like having a rope around my neck and a leash around my neck, and the U.S. is on the other end yanking on that leash. I want some leash. I want some level of freedom. So we're just creating our own disaster. And that's what, kind of narcissists do. That's how narcissists destroy relationships. And we have a narcissistic empire.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you said it right. It's not necessarily, when the U.S. became the basically the sole superpower in the world and instituted its dominance through its currency. One of the major ways that it did so was through its currency. And then, of course, after the Bretton Woods, radically transformed in the 1970s with the petrodollar in Saudi Arabia and all of that, getting rid of the gold standard, all of that. The the dependency on the dollar that most of the world had was kind of, while it had huge consequences and created immense poverty and inequality, and of course it fueled lots and lots of wars, still it's very complicated to get out from under that. So as you're saying, I think one of the things about de-dollarization is that if it could be avoided, most countries probably would avoid it, because it does take a whole lot of restructuring. And it is really about the world financial system, not just what you do, because surely you can do currency swaps bilaterally, and that's all well and good. But the world market is dominated by the US dollar still to this day. So the fact that you do have so many countries, even countries like Saudi Arabia, which we have to be honest, Saudi Arabia is not a country looking to be completely independent of the US's economic and military relationship. It's not looking to do that. It's not looking to break away, but it is looking to diversify, because it sees Saudi Arabia, Turkey, they all see the writing on the wall that this is not going well. It's not just Ukraine, it's everything that led up to Ukraine. It's everything that has happened since. And just watching Europe, this mighty, overdeveloped, right? It exploited much of the world to get to its level of development, and now it's facing utter collapse. I mean, that's a lesson. All these countries consider themselves developing, emerging, maybe is the more PC term. They all want to emerge into frontline economic powerhouses. They want to be more developed. They want to have increased living standards. They can't do that under the thumb of the US dollar.
Yeah, and I think that what we're really saying here is that there are a lot of other parts of the world, and particularly the more traditionalist countries and cultures that have a long history, are recognizing that this is not about the U.S. It's not about the U.S. empire. It's not about the Biden administration. This is about an economic system, neoliberal capitalism, that just doesn't work for the working class, that it is unstable. And so they may not even be saying that, but neoliberal capitalism, the branch of capitalism that has developed, and I would argue that the City of London is the brains behind it, and the U.S. military is the brawn behind it. We're the knuckle draggers that go around. They point us in the direction, and we go around and we're the gorillas, as they say in the mafia. And I think the world is realizing, it's painful and coercive, and this neoliberal capitalism will beat all of us down. We're going to lose to it sooner or later. We either abandon it, get away from it, or it's going to take us out, take us along with it. They see the neoliberal capitalism of the US and UK taking out all of their allies. You know, they're like, whoa, look at Germany and look at all of the countries that are associated working with them. They see this $31 trillion deficit. They see these weird magical tools, derivatives, and asset-backed securities. Nobody even the people that sell them barely know what the hell they really are. And these countries are saying, I sell oil, I sell gas, I sell wheat, I sell things, and I can trade stuff and make money. I don't know what those people are doing, but whatever they're doing, it's falling apart. And so that's the other part of the discussion that has to be had, and that is an economic system of neoliberal capitalism is collapsing, and economic systems have collapsed before. And because the US empire culturally wedded itself to neoliberal capitalism, almost like a religion, right? That this is America, and it's a self-serving racket, but they integrated it into the very DNA of who we are, the free market, which that was a fraud. Even libertarians look at this and say, well, we're for the free market. but this ain't it. You know what I mean? So that it's a fraud, it's a self-serving racket. The economic system is crashing. And since we have tied ourselves culturally and everything to this economic system, it drags the whole mess down with it.
Yeah, and I think we can close the economic point here. I definitely want to get your reaction to this. Now, these countries, it's Saudi Arabia, Turkey. Yes, they're looking at this as a way to diversify and protect themselves from the worst excesses of what you're talking about, because these countries have also political systems that they have to maintain. Saudi Arabia cannot have a monarchy if it finds itself completely mired down and broken down by the world economic system. It can't. It needs to maintain some semblance of legitimacy. But even beyond this, not just for these countries, you even see countries all across the African continent, which many people don't even look at, like Mali, Burkina Faso. They're kicking out France and they're in its military, and they're trading now with China and Russia in volumes that the United States is not so happy about, and the collective West is not so happy about. And this alternative that exists now, while the foundations are still being built for this de-dollarized world, Russia and China are these massive alternatives. China, the arguably the biggest economy in the world in real terms, all the real terms that you were talking about, Garland, and a willingness to establish cooperative relationships that build infrastructure and that really give tangible benefits. And then Russia, this big energy powerhouse, with a similar disposition. It does not want to interfere in political affairs, and it wants to basically do whatever it can in its relationships to benefit, and also give whatever it can to the benefit of global South countries. That has been the relationship. That's why Africa, most of the African continent, did not come out in favor of U.S. and EU sanctions against Russia. It's why the U.S.'s trade volume with Africa shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and explodes with China. I think the ratio is something like 5, 6, 7 to 1 in terms of billions of dollars between China and the U.S. when it comes to African trade. So, there are these alternatives now. What's your take on this development? Because as you said, the U.S., it's neoliberal capitalism to the grave. China, Russia, and most countries that do trade with both of them and are looking for a bigger and stronger relationship don't necessarily see it the same way.
Yeah, and what's happening is people are being reminded that, the foundation of economics is some guy has rice and some guy on his farm and some guy has eggs on his farm, and they need to trade those things. That's the foundation of economics. It's not what you can make up and dream up and things you can come up with to divvy up things that don't even exist and sell them and put a number on them. No, it's foundational things. And I think when a lot of countries in the world saw the sanctions, and a lot of economists, a lot of people saw these sanctions hit Russia, and they saw that it really didn't bother Russia really that much. It certainly, there's some issues there, but that they came out of it really well because they have hard things that they sell. It was a reminder that, again, it was another part of the death of neoliberal capitalism, because it was a reminder to the world, man, those people are playing with ghosts. They're playing with economic ghosts, and other people have corn and eggs and rice and things like that. And it was other countries, such as in Africa, South America, looking at themselves and saying, we have actual things to sell, like Russia or China. We grow corn or something here. We have cigars and coffee and things like that we grow. We have natural resources, lithium, that people want. If given an opportunity and we can do international trade on a fair basis, we can sustain our country fairly reasonably. It was a wake-up call to realize that what the U.S. was doing was pure coercion, and that their system is flawed, and all people had to do was have an opportunity to integrate in a fair system, and they would have an opportunity to prosper, and they could create prosperity. And the Sanctions on Russia really made that clear to the world. And you know, it's funny. I tell you this, if these new currencies start popping up around, some of these same JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, as quiet as kept, they're going to be trying to buy these currencies. They're going to be, I mean, because they're practical in the real world, and they're going to be like, yeah, man, these asset-backed securities are all good and fine, but that's backed up by gold. How can I get some rubles or whatever the heck these people are doing? They're going to go out and try to buy it. And I mean, if you're invested, and if somebody says there's a new currency in South America, would you like to buy $500 worth of it? I'm buying 500. If I can get some of it, I'm buying it because I'm thinking the dollar's going to crap out. This is going to do well. So as the other part of it is, as these other currencies, there are people like me waiting with bated breath. Not that I'm a trillionaire or something, but I mean, we all may have a couple bucks in a retirement account or something that we could turn into something else. So it's like, if some of these other currencies pop up, I'm going to start looking at the things that I got, you know, my little retirement accounts or whatever, and saying, can I yank some of this out and buy a currency here, there, or whatever? Because let's face it, our investments probably in 5 or 10 years ain't going to be what they are now. And some of those could be, you know, effectively Bitcoin, where they go up 500 million times. So yeah, that's the reality. You wait till these currencies start going on the market and you see people start, you know, scrambling, crawling over each other like people at Black Friday trying to get a TV out of Walmart.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the reason that would come about is because the currency exchange, this development of a new independent currency system, apart from the U.S., signals and will ultimately become realized in an independent trade network, an independent, in kind of like an economic system growing out of neoliberal capitalism and pushing neoliberal capitalism at the margins. There's even these big investors, these IMF heads, people at Credit Suisse and institutions like that, who are saying this is what will happen if China, if Saudi Arabia, if Russia, if Iran, if these countries go through with their plans and are successful in them. Then you will see panic and economic crisis in the US and Europe, because one by one, their influence over the market, the world market, is going to crumble, meaning that their currency is going to shoot up. It's going to massively, inflation is going to massively shoot up, and their currencies are going to get less and less valuable. They're going to drop in value. And then what do investors do when that happens? Well, they run away. They hide everything. They take everything they can, and they wait for the storm to clear. But this is a storm that won't clear. But you can react to that surely, Garland. But I definitely want to get to Balloon Gate. Do you have any final comments on that?
Well, you know, keep in mind, with $31 trillion in debt. I mean, clearly that's a debt that's unpayable, and it's going up. You know, it's just, they're about to raise the debt ceiling. I mean, the reality is it's not even a real debt. It's so high that it's not payable. But what could happen through inflation is that we could get to a point where, you know, basically our entire budget goes to paying service on the debt alone. And at that point, you're in hyperinflation. You're into basically a complete economic collapse. And the reality is, in this country, that's not. It's not out of the question that can happen, even if things go on normally as they are now. But if we keep building the debt as quickly as we are now, in 5 or 10 years, if nothing changes, which it will, we wouldn't be able to pay the service on our debt. So we are spiraling out of control. And, you know, we're like on a roller coaster economically going off a cliff. Everybody knows we're heading off. Nobody knows how to stop it.